Hi, my name is Ebony Lying, and I'm going to tell you a story about my birthing experience in College Station, Texas in 2015. So I was a first-time mom, and I went in for a scheduled induction because I was overdue by a week and a half. And they called me in the night before the induction was supposed to be scheduled, and they began the induction process by trying to dilate me when I checked in about 10 o'clock at night. So the dilation lasted throughout the night, and in the morning about 6 a.m., the doctor came in to break my water. So the labor process had officially begun. At that point, I was on some mild painkillers, and things were okay until they started cranking up the Pitocin, which was supposed to encourage me to continue to dilate and further the labor process. So as they increased my Pitocin levels, the pain levels continued to increase, and they just put more and more and more Pitocin in my IV, and things became more and more painful, even though I wasn't progressing through the dilation as best as they wanted me to. So about, I would say, from the time they broke my water to the time I requested the epidural must have been, they broke my water at 5 or 6 a.m., and then I requested the epidural about noon. And at that point, they didn't know how long the labor process, they couldn't give me a projection, because how could they know? And so because the Pitocin levels were so high and my pain was very intense, my contractions were going from 0 to 100 every few seconds, the epidural definitely helped. The anesthesiologist was very nice. They came down, they explained everything to me, started the epidural, things were going great. But because they were trying to get me to dilate quicker, the OBGYN and the labor and delivery nurses suggested that I move positions. But because I was numb from the epidural, they would have to move me, roll me from one side to the other, lift my leg, put me in different positions to try to encourage dilation. And during this process of rolling me around in bed, moving me into different positions, my epidural catheter slipped. I didn't know this at the time, but suddenly I started feeling tingling in my legs. I started feeling the contractions again. And so now it's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So this is about 5 or so hours after they gave me the epidural. And I said, hey, you know what? I'm starting to feel these contractions again. And my labor delivery nurse was very nice. She said, okay, well, let's consult with the anesthesiologist. So they sent the anesthesiologist nurse down to talk to me. And I explained what was going on. And she was kind of like, well, sometimes there's some breakthrough pain. You're just keep pushing the epidural button. So they give you this little button that you push if you need additional numbing. And so, I was like, okay, so I was pushing the button, nothing was happening. And after you push the button so many times, you get locked out. So I had gotten locked out, but I was still in pain. I was in much more pain than when I initially called the nurse. And so I said, you know what, I'm feeling pain. So they sent the nurse back down, and the anesthesiologist nurse, and I was like, I'm feeling pain, it's getting much, much worse. And they were like, well, sometimes, if they don't place the epidural correctly, sometimes you might feel pain in different areas, but it's okay, just keep pushing the button. So I was like, okay, so I'm pushing the button. And so now it is about, I first started telling them about the pain about 5. And so it was now going on 7 o'clock, and the pain was so intense at this point. I'm screaming as much as I'd scream, which is not very much. And I was telling my husband something's not right. So they called the anesthesiologist nurse back, And, they kept telling me, just push the button, just push the button. It's just breakthrough pain. You just have to breathe through it. And again, as they're continuing to increase my Pitocin levels to continue to encourage me to dilate, the pain just was more and more intense. And so finally, about 8 o'clock that night, because I'm still in labor at this point, they sent the anesthesiologist. The anesthesiologist finally came, not just the nurse. And I was like, I've been pushing the button. I'm locked out. I'm in extreme pain. I feel every contraction. And so he did an exam. He, used the little metal tool on my foot, asked me if I could feel things. I was like, yeah, I can feel that. He put it on my legs. He asked me if I could. I was like, yeah, I can feel that. And then they wanted me to tell them when the contractions were, to verify when I was feeling the contractions. So they turned the monitor and they were watching the contractions on the screen, and I would tell them exactly when I was feeling each and every one of those contractions, which was like 0 to 100, 0 to 100, back to back to back. And so at this point they realized, okay, she's definitely feeling these contractions. And so then he looked at my back where they had placed the epidural, and then that's when finally, many hours later that I made my initial request, that they realized that my catheter had slipped and that I wasn't actually getting the epidural medicine to numb my pain. So they're like, oh my goodness, we're so sorry, your catheter slipped. It must have been from you rolling in the bed. And so I said, well, I need another one, because at this point I still hadn't delivered the baby, and we didn't know how long it was going to be, and I was in excruciating pain. And so the anesthesiologist was like, usually we don't, give women the epidural, another epidural so close to beginning to push. But if you can stay still, I can go ahead and place it. And so I was like, look, doctor, I will do whatever you need me to do. I will stay as still as you need me to be, because I cannot survive an undetermined amount of time in this much pain. And so he's like, okay, I really advise against it, but, if you want it, let's do it. So my husband held my hand. I, hunched over for him to go ahead and place the new epidural. And he placed it, and I felt immediate relief as the medicine started taking effect. And I think I fell asleep while they were patching me up, putting the patch on for the catheter. And, I just felt such relief at that point. And then my son was born maybe an hour and a half later. But had I not been insistent on telling the nurses that I was in pain, and then finally after 2-3 hours of insisting that I was actually in pain, did someone take me seriously and give me a new epidural. So I can't exactly say it was due to the fact that I was a Black woman, because we do know there's a history of doctors and nurses not believing Black women when they say they're in pain. I can't exactly say this thing happened to me, but from my experience in the hospital, having to advocate for myself so aggressively, and hearing other people's stories about how they've had their pain managed in hospital, I have to believe that it has to be somewhat of a racial bias that happened to me that day when I was in labor and delivery. So that's my story. I hope that it helps you understand racial bias in medicine. Thank you.